Today we are going to look at the impact of proximity on obedience. This was researched by Milgram in 1974. The picture shows the original study in which the teacher and the learner were in different rooms, so could not see each other, but the teacher could still hear the learner's screams. The experimenter was in the room with the teacher to prompt them to continue up to 450 volts, which was the maximum, and the percentage of participants that did reach 450 volts in Milgram's original study was 65%. The variation studied by Milgram is proximity. Proximity describes the distance between objects, time, or relationships. Milgram noticed that the proximity of the teacher to the learner affected obedience rates, as well as the proximity of the experimenter to the teacher. There were three variations in Milgram's original study. The first involved removing the experimenter from the room, in which the experimenter could only communicate and give orders over a telephone. The next variation involved the learner and the teacher being moved closer into the same room so that the teacher could hear and see the effect of the electric shocks on the learner. This can be seen in the top photo. The final variation was called touch proximity. As seen in the bottom photo, this involved the teacher and the learner being in the same room, with the learner having to voluntarily place their hand on a shock plate each time they said the wrong answer. If the learner refused, the teacher would force their hand on the shock plate. As for the findings of Milgram's study, there was a drop in obedience levels in all three variations. To remind you, Milgram's original study resulted in 65% of participants reaching 450 volts. The variation involving the experimenter being in another room saw 20% of participants reaching 450 volts. The second variation, involving the learner and the teacher being in the same room, resulted in 40% of participants reaching 450 volts. The final variation, which involved touch proximity, resulted in 30% of participants still continuing to 450 volts. So, what do the conclusions show? They show that people are more obedient when the authority figure is closer, especially as it allows them to place responsibility of their actions on the authority figure. It also showed that facing the consequences of our actions makes us much more likely to question them. One could argue, in the case of war, it is much easier for a president to enter a war by signing a piece of paper than for soldiers having to actively kill people, as the consequences of their actions are right in front of them. This also means that soldiers can place responsibility for their actions on their superiors.